What if the last words your dying mother ever spoke weren't goodbye, but a secret that rewrote your entire bloodline? The hospice room that rainy October evening hummed with the sterile sigh of machines. Rain lashed against the window, slicing the streetlights into trembling golden stripes across Mom's face. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, pale, fragile, yet her eyes were razor-sharp. The oxygen monitor beeped, beep, 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 the only sound in the world. She waited until the nurse slipped out. Until it was just us two, the machines, and the smell of antiseptic and rain-soaked wool. Her cold hand found mine. She squeezed, hard star. "Sweetheart," she rasped, voice thin as tissue paper, "I need to tell you something." "And you swear to me, swear you'll never tell your father." "Not while he's breathing." "Maybe, never." I was 29. My mother was dying of lung cancer. 14 months of scans, chemo, and whispered goodbyes had taught me one thing: you don't refuse a deathbed vow. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "I swear." For 40 minutes she spoke. Steadily. Calmly. Like she'd rehearsed it for years. When she finally closed her eyes and let go of my hand, I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was the keeper of a secret that felt like a live wire in my chest. My mom's name was Eleanor. 61 years old when she left us. Lung cancer, 14 months after they found it. Most people don't get 14 months. But Eleanor used every single day. She planned her funeral down to the last hymn. Wrote handwritten letters to everyone she loved. Laughed at bad TV shows until the week she couldn't sit up anymore. My dad, James, was her anchor. Quiet, gentle, the kind of man who fixed dripping taps and remembered your exact coffee order. 35 years of marriage, and everyone called them the forever kind. I wore that pride like a second skin. The confession happened on a Thursday. James was in the cafeteria getting tea. Aunt Megan had stepped out to take a call. Mom had been asleep for hours, so when her eyes snapped open, clear, present, unnervingly alert I froze mid-breath. She patted the mattress beside her. I sat. She took my hand. 31 years ago, she said, her voice barely a whisper but steady as stone, for years into my marriage to your father, I had an affair. My stomach dropped. Mom, please don't, promise me first, she interrupted, urgent. I need the promise before the words. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times. The promise before the words, she knew exactly what she was doing. I promise, I choked out. She nodded. Stared at the ceiling for a beat. Then locked eyes with me. His name was Daniel. A coworker. Someone James shook hands with at office parties, shared eggnog with at Christmas, never suspecting a thing. It ended after 8 months. Quietly. We never spoke again. She swallowed. I never told James. Confessed to a priest instead. Carried it alone for 30 years. Her thumb brushed mine. But I couldn't leave this world with it completely unspoken. I needed one person to know the whole truth of me, not just the shiny parts. Relief flooded me. Painful, yes, but understandable. Affairs happen. Marriages heal. This was a ghost from before I existed, long buried. I grieved for her guilt, for James's ignorance, but I thought, okay. I can hold this, I was so wrong. Her grip turned iron tight. Daniel and I, she said softly. The timing. She paused, as if choosing each word. I've never been certain. Not completely. The dates, they line up. I told myself for years it wasn't possible. The room went utterly still. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. But you have his eyes, she whispered. And I've known it since the second you were born. The air left my lungs. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside that room, my world stopped. Eleanor died 6 days later. Early dawn. James was holding her hand. I stood beside him, my promise already a lead weight in my gut. She slipped away quietly, just like she'd lived. No drama. When the monitor flatlined, James made a sound I've never heard before and pray never to hear again. I gripped his arm. Said nothing. I was already keeping my vow. 214 people came to the funeral. I counted them, not on purpose. Just a way to stay standing while grief roared inside me. James stood beside me the whole day. Steadfast. Shattered. Present. He shook every hand. Accepted every hug. Said thank you for coming 214 times without his voice ever cracking. I watched him and thought, this man has loved her for 35 years, and I'm the only soul alive who knows he never really knew her. Grief has its own season. The first weeks are just learning to breathe underwater. I went back to my apartment. Back to work. Back to pretending life was normal. Every Sunday I called James. He sounded hollow. I keep making 2 cups of coffee, he told me once. I didn't have words. I just listened. The secret lived inside me like a second heartbeat. Some days it faded. Others, like when James laughed at some silly story and sounded like himself again, it surged up and stole my breath. 4 months after the funeral, I started researching. Not DNA yet. Just Daniel. Eleanor had given me a name, a city, a company, a time frame. 3 weeks later, I found him. 68 years old. Retired. Living in Scottsdale, Arizona. Married. 2 sons. One of them, 30 years old. 1 year older than me. I stared at Daniel's profile photo until my eyes burned. Brown eyes. Mine are green, asterisk Eleanor's asterisk eyes, everyone always said. I clung to that. Lied to myself that it meant something. Year 1 passed. I kept the promise. Then James got sick. A minor cardiac scare, nothing fatal, but he landed in a hospital bed for 4 days. I flew home immediately. Sitting beside him in that sterile room, it felt like a cruel echo of Eleanor's hospice. On day 2, he turned to me out of nowhere and said, "You look like her, you know. More every year." I nodded, throat tight. "She loved you more than anything," he murmured. "More than me, even." I always knew that. It never bothered me. He said it like it was the simplest truth in the world. I fled to the hospital bathroom and sat on the floor, shaking. The promise felt different now, heavier. Like a stone I could no longer carry alone. That spring, I started therapy. 4 months, I danced around the secret. My therapist, patient, quiet, waited. Finally, I spilled it all. When I finished, she leaned forward and asked just 3 words, "Who are you keeping the promise for, her, or you?" I didn't answer. But her question haunted me. Then James's heart scare triggered a doctor's recommendation: genetic testing. Standard procedure for cardiac risk. Simple. Reasonable. Unless you suspect you weren't biologically related to the man you call dad. I stared at the referral on my kitchen table for 2 weeks. Picked it up. Put it down. Made coffee. Stared again. On a Tuesday evening, exactly 2.5 years after Eleanor took my hand in that hospice room, I ordered a DNA kit. For medical reasons, I lied to myself. 11 days later, the results pinged my phone. I sat in my car, 4th floor parking garage, heart hammering. I scrolled past the ethnicity pie chart. Went straight to DNA matches. Under close family, James's profile glowed. I'd sent him a kit for his birthday, "Let's trace our family tree." And he'd done it cheerfully. 23.1%. Asterisk close family. Consistent with half-sibling. Grandparent. Or a half-relationship asterisk not a father is 50%. 23.1% is not a father. I slumped against the steering wheel. I'd known it was possible. Lived with the maybe 4 years. But possible and confirmed are two different universes. And I'd just been handed a one-way ticket to the latter. I called my therapist from that parking garage. She kept me on the line for 20 minutes while I sobbed into my steering wheel. She saved me that day. That night, I didn't open an email to Daniel. Not yet. What I needed wasn't his story, it was James's. I drove home that weekend. James was in the garden when I arrived, kneeling in the dirt, tending roses Eleanor had planted years ago. He looked up, smiled that quiet, uncomplicated smile of his, and said, "Hey, kiddo." We sat on the back steps. Talked about the garden. The neighbor's cat. A documentary he'd watched. Safe. Normal. Then he sat back on his heels, gazing at the roses. "She'd have cut these back harder," he said softly. "She was ruthless with roses. Said you gotta be cruel to get the bloom." He laughed, a fragile sound. "I can't bring myself to do it her way yet." Something inside me cracked open, quietly. "Dad," I whispered. "Can I ask you something hard?" He turned to me, eyes gentle. "Always. Did you and Mom ever have rough years? Things you got through but never really talked about?" He was silent a long moment. Pulled off a gardening glove. Then the other. Sat down in the dirt without caring about his trousers. "Every marriage has those years," he said. "Anyone who says different is selling snake oil." He looked at the roses. "There was a stretch, early on, when we both wondered if we'd chosen wrong. But we always came back to each other. Every single time." He met my eyes. "Why?" I held his gaze. "Because I think she was more complicated than anyone knew," I said. "And I think you loved all of her anyway." He studied me. Then, simply, "Yes. I did." He went back to the roses. I sat on the steps. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. And I finally understood the answer to my therapist's question. I wrote the email to Daniel on a Sunday night. 3 weeks after the garden conversation. 11 drafts. The final version was 6 sentences. I'm Eleanor's daughter. She told me everything on her deathbed. I've done a DNA test. I need to know the truth, for me, not for anyone else. I expect nothing. But I need to know. I hit send at 11:43 p.m. Closed my laptop. And didn't sleep. 2 days later, Daniel replied. Thoughtful. Careful. He remembered Eleanor. Said he'd thought of her, of the possibility, more times than he cared to admit. He had a wife. 2 sons. A life built in good faith. Then he wrote, I don't want to wreck what you have. But I also refuse to pretend anymore. We're past the age of pretending. We spoke by phone the following Thursday. His voice was low, steady. He asked about Eleanor first, how she'd been, how she'd died. When I told him, he went quiet. She was remarkable, he said quietly. Whatever the circumstances, she was genuinely remarkable. I believed him. It helped more than I expected. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Careful. Tender. Like handling glass that might shatter. At the end, he said, I'd like to do a formal test. If you're willing. I'm willing. 3 weeks later, the result landed, 99.97% probability. That number wasn't absence, it was presence. Confirmation, not loss. It hit me differently. Deeper. I told my therapist before I told anyone. She asked the question I'd been dreading for 3 years, are you going to tell your father? All my walls crumbled in that moment. James, gardening, making 2 cups of coffee, holding Eleanor's hand as she left us, deserved the truth. Even if it came 30 years late. I drove home the next weekend. Didn't call ahead. James was in the kitchen, reading, a mug of tea beside him. He looked up, surprised. This is a nice surprise. I sat across from him. Laid my hands flat on the table. Dad, I said, voice steady. I need to tell you something. And it's going to be hard. I need you to let me say it all of it, before you speak. He took off his glasses. Set them on the table. Looked at me with the full, quiet attention that had always been his greatest gift. Okay, he said. I'm listening. I told him everything. The hospice confession. The promise. The DNA kit. The 23.1%. Daniel. The phone call. The 99.97%. I didn't soften a word. He deserved the raw truth. He didn't speak for a long time. He stared at the table. At his cooling tea. At his hands. I watched emotions cross his face like clouds: shock, grief, confusion, something I couldn't name. Finally, he lifted his head. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. She told you, he whispered. At the end. She told you. Yes. Not me. The pain in those two words shattered me. Why now? He asked. Because I couldn't carry it alone anymore, I said. And because you deserve the truth, even if it's late. He nodded slowly. Looked out the window at the garden, her garden. Did she love me? The question was so soft it barely reached me. Yes, I said without hesitation. With her whole heart. I know she did. He nodded again. Looked back at his hands. Then I have to figure out what to do with the rest of it, he said. I know, I replied. I'll be right here while you do. We didn't speak for 3 hours. Sometimes we talked of Eleanor. Sometimes of nothing. He made dinner, simple, quiet, the way he always did. He washed the dishes. I dried them. That was 4 months ago. He's still processing. Some days he doesn't mention it. Others, he asks a small, careful question, and I answer honestly. We're navigating a wilderness with no map. Daniel and I have spoken twice more. We're not building a relationship. We're simply leaving a door open. That's enough. I think of Eleanor differently now. Not worse. Not better. More fully. She loved fiercely. Lied profoundly. Carried guilt for 30 years. And on her deathbed, she chose me to hold the weight of her truth. Was it fair? I don't know. Fairness doesn't apply to deathbed confessions. What I do know. Secrets don't die with the people who keep them, they leap, from trembling hand to trembling hand, until someone, finally, sets them down. Even when that truth arrives 30 years late. Even when it lands on a kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee, especially then, speech balloon, I carried that secret for 3 years. Would you have kept the promise, or told your father the truth from the start? I read every single comment.